Okay, your objective for lesson 3 is I will model tiling with centimeter and inch unit squares as a strategy to measure area. So you're going to be working with kind of what you did in the previous lesson where you're using your square centimeters and your square inches to work with area. Okay, I want you to go ahead and get out 10 of your square centimeter tiles. So don't take out the square inches, take out 10 of your square centimeter tiles. Push pause if you need to do that. Okay, I want you to arrange all of your squares into 2 equal rows to create a rectangle. Make sure the tiles are touching each other, but they're not overlapping on top of one another. And once you have that done, I want you to go ahead and on your board write the area of that rectangle. Make sure that you're not just putting the number, because if we're working with square centimeters, that is also part of your area. So we're not just putting the number, make sure you're also including your square centimeters whenever you're writing down what the area is. So I want you to push pause and do that for me on your board. Okay, so the area of that rectangle is not 12, but 10 square centimeters. Now, if I have this, and I'm still working with 10 squares, is there another way that you could arrange all of your tiles to make a new rectangle? For example, we just made 2 equal rows. Is there another way that we could use 10 squares to make a new rectangle without just using 2 rows? I want you to try that using your 10 squares. And I want you to push play whenever you're ready to check your answer to see if your new rectangle is the right rectangle. Okay, these are the different ways that you could have used your 10 squares to make new rectangles. This one, there are 5 rows with 2 in each row. This, you just had 10 laying out side by side. This is 10 laying out side by side, but it's just going up and down. And all of these rectangles have the same area because they're all still using 10 squares. And you're using square centimeters, so every single one of these rectangles had an area of 10 square centimeters as well. Okay, that's all we're going to do for the concept development for today. So go ahead and have your problem set ready. If you need to push pause to put away your square centimeters and get that out, you need to go ahead and do that. Okay, so number 1 says each square is a square unit. So we're not working with centimeters or inches on this part right here. These are just square units. So what is the area of each of the following shapes? And I want you to notice for part A, they've already used or put what you needed to write. So since we're looking at square units, that has to be part of our area whenever we're writing it down. So when we're looking at shape A, you need to be counting how many squares cover that rectangle, because that's going to tell you what the area of the rectangle is. So whenever I look here, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So over here on your problem set, you need to be writing 6, because the area of rectangle A is 6 square units. So on part B, you need to make sure you have square units written down, because that is going to go with your area, and you're going to do the same thing with C and D. So I want you to go ahead and count the squares in B and C and D to find the area of those 3 rectangles. And I want you to push pause to do that, and whenever you're ready to check your answers, you may push play. So for rectangle B, the area was 12 square units. There were 2 rows with 6 in each row. The rectangle C had an area of 12 square units because there were 4 rows with 3 in each row. And rectangle D had an area of 20 square units because there were 4 rows with 5 in each row. Okay, moving on to number 2. This one says that each square is 1 square unit again, and you have to find the area of all of the rectangles. So you're doing the exact same thing like we did up here in this chart. You're counting the squares that cover the rectangle, and then you're writing the area of the rectangles on the line. And since we're working with square units, make sure that you're using square units whenever you write your answer. So I want you to go ahead and work on A, B, C, and D on this bottom part of your paper. And whenever you're ready to check your answer, you can push play. So this rectangle right here has 6 square units all together. For rectangle B, the area is 9 square units. For rectangle C, the area is 16 square units. And for rectangle D, the area is 12 square units. Okay, moving on to the back. How would the rectangles in problem 1 be different if they were composed of square inches? So when you look at the rectangles that we used in problem 1, they were just square units. How would they be different if you were using your square inches? And if you need to look in your baggie just to remind yourself of what a square inch looks like, you can do that. So how would they be different if we were using square inches? I want you to go ahead and write down what you think as your answer right here and push play whenever you're ready to check it. Okay, so what I was looking for is they would be bigger because square inches are bigger. Okay? And if you notice, our squares in our baggie that are square inches, you can tell how big they are compared to square units or square centimeters. So if you don't have this written correctly, make sure that you're fixing yours before you move on. Okay, so for this part, you're going to select one rectangle from problem 1. So whenever I look back, one of these, or these, and you're going to take your square inch and square centimeter grid paper that you have with this lesson, and you are going to make that on each one of those. So for example, if I were to choose rectangle A, on my square centimeter grid paper, I would make this rectangle that has 6 squares in it, and then I would also make this rectangle on my square inch grid having 6 squares in it. Because you can see the difference in the way that they look whenever you're using your square inches and your square centimeter grid. So I'm going to let you go ahead and do that. I don't have the answer showing right here because I don't have the grid paper to put on here, but you need to compare it to these rectangles in problem 1 just to see if you have them correctly. Because if this has 2 rows, then the rectangles that you're drawing on your grid paper need to have 2 rows. If you're using C, since this has 4 rows, you need to make sure the one that you're drawing on your grid paper has 4 rows, and that they still have the same amount of squares. It's just you're working with square inches and square centimeters. Okay, so moving on to the bottom. Use a separate piece of square centimeter grid paper. You don't have to use a separate piece of centimeter grid paper because you still have a lot of room left on yours, so I want you to use the same grid paper. Just make sure you're not using the inch grid paper, make sure you're using the centimeter grid paper. And I want you to draw 4 different rectangles that each have an area of 8 square centimeters. So 4 different rectangles, each one has an area of 8 square centimeters. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and give you one. One of your rectangles should have 2 rows with 4 in each row. So the way you're going to make that on your paper is you're just going to shade that in. So shade in 2 rows with 4 in each row. And then I want you to go ahead and I want you to draw the 3 other rectangles that will have an area of 8 square centimeters. And whenever you're ready to check it, you can push play. Okay, so another one would be this one. It's just flipped a different way. So now I have 4 rows with 2 in each row, and there's 8 altogether. Another one would just be 8 going across, and another one would be 8 going up and down. So if you don't have these correct on your centimeter grid paper, I want you to go ahead and correct that before you move on. Okay, moving on to the exit slip. Make sure whenever you're writing your area right here that you're not just using a number. And make sure down here, whenever it says explain, make sure you're explaining to me what they want you to explain before you bring me your paper. And whenever you're finished, go ahead and bring me your paper.